all doing well? The session today is the second event of the monthly speaker series hosted by the Pacific Inclusive Education Research and Resources, PIER, Inclusive Gifted Education Center. The Inclusive Gifted Education Center is managed by the faculty and staff at the Center on Disability Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, with funding provided by the U.S. Department of Education Gifted and Talented Education Program. The overarching goal of our center is to nurture untapped talents through inclusive practices. As part of our ongoing efforts, we hosted a symposium earlier in the year in Honolulu that focused on supporting the post-secondary transition of neurodivergent students. And the PIER subsequent virtual monthly sessions we started off last month are aimed at raising people's awareness of issues related to neurodiversity and twice exceptionality. Each session offers knowledge and perspectives of well-known recognized speakers in the area of inclusion, neurodiversity, and education. And for today's event, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers, Dr. Joseph Madaus and Nicholas Gelber, who will talk about how to help twice exceptional students with autism succeed in college. And they're both from University of Connecticut. Dr. Madaus is Director of Collaborative and Post-Secondary Education on Disability at the University of Connecticut, or UConn, and as well as Professor of Special Education in the UConn Department of Educational Psychology. He also coordinates the UConn Post-Secondary Disability Training Institute, which provides intensive professional development to college disability service professionals. He currently serves on the editorial board of 9 journals, including the Journal of Post-Secondary Education and Disability, Teaching Exceptional Children, and Career Development and Transition for Exceptional Individuals. Dr. Nicholas Gelber is Associate Research Professor in the UConn Department of Educational Psychology. Previously, he was an assistant professor at the UConn Health Center School of Medicine and the research director for the UConn Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. At the event, Dr. Madaus and Gelber will share the results of 2 studies related to helping autistic college students who are also academically talented to be successful in college. They will also talk about a video training model that they use in their projects. Today's presentation originally was also planned to be joined by Dr. Sally Rees, who is not able to be here with us today. However, she is also part of the work that Dr. Madaus and Gelber will introduce us to. Thank you so much again to Dr. Madaus and Gelber, and I suggest you start sharing your slides. And thank you again for being with here today.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Slides? Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction, Claudia, and Jin, thank you for having us as well. Aloha, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Joe Madaus from the University of Connecticut, and as Claudia said, I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Gelbar, also from the University of Connecticut. And we're going to talk about our project. The title of this is Helping Twice Exceptional Students with Autism Succeed in College. And we'll give you a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about the grant overall that led to some of this research. We know that there are increasing numbers of students with autism spectrum disorder. In fact, the most recent one statistic I've seen from the Center for Disease Controls was 1 in 36 students have ASD. And we know that an increasing number of these students are applying to and attending college. We know, too, that there's a subset of these students who have advanced skills in academic and creative areas, gifts and talents. And we call these students twice exceptional, or 2E. And there can be a range of types of 2E students, and we're really going to focus for today on students who are autistic and also gifted. We know, too, that 2E students with ASD may not be receiving necessary education and preparation in high school that would allow them to be successful or as successful as they might be in college, because oftentimes the talents may overshadow the disability, and so the students aren't getting the services that they need for the disability, or the disability may be masking the talent, so the students aren't getting the opportunities to build on their strengths and build on their creativity. So in order to address this rising group of students on college campuses, we're wrapping up the 5th year of this grant called Project Twice Exceptional with Autism Spectrum Disorder, or Project 2E ASD. And this is a 5-year grant through the United States Department of Education, Jacob Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Program. And our overall goal was to focus on ways that both high school teachers could help prepare 2E students, and colleges can best support 2E students. We did a number of different things, but chief among them were these 4 studies that we conducted. One was interviews with 2E ASD students. We ended up interviewing 40 students. They were all in the Northeast, and they were all at very competitive to highly competitive institutions. The reason that they were all in the Northeast was we originally, as the original grant application, we were going to go to their schools and we were going to interview them. And then this thing called COVID visited us, and that kind of broke that plan up. And so we conducted, as we'll talk about, we conducted most of the interviews over the phone. Now, we did some parallel studies. We also interviewed parents of 2E, 10 parents of these 40 students. We also interviewed college service providers from 10 different institutions. Again, highly competitive to very competitive to highly competitive institutions. And we also interviewed high school teachers and counselors, 20 of those students. And what we're going to focus on today are the results of Study 1 and Study 3 as they specifically relate to experiences transitioning to college and in college. And we're also going to present an overview of a series of online video modules that we created that are free, and we'll show you some clips of those, and then we'll show you how you can access them. Nick, I'll turn it over to you, and just tell me when you want me to advance.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll just tell you next slide when we need to advance. And I think this is like a 40-minute room, so it may like cut out. So if you just may have to click the link to log back in. So Claudia just put that in the chat, but I wanted everyone to hear that. So like you probably also have a timer in your upper left corner. So we did these 4 studies. We also did a survey study, and what we were really trying to do was backwards engineer, right? So the goal of our grant was to create a summer institute for high school students with autism at UConn. They were going to come to UConn's campus. They were going to take a college course. There was already sort of like a pre-college summer program that UConn runs. And we were going to add some stuff to that was specific for students on the autism spectrum. We were going to give them certain things. But we kind of knew some of what those things are, but we said, like, why don't we talk to students with autism, college providers, parents, their counselors, their teachers. Let's get like, what should we be doing in this program, right? So the goal here was, let's reverse engineer so we can create this intervention study that we were going to do. Obviously, then COVID happened, so we did do a study, but it was we basically did it online virtually, and there were some challenges of that environment. We're happy to answer any questions about that, but that's not the focus. We wanted to kind of what the commonalities across all of what we saw. So we used a semi-structured interview protocol. There were very similar for questions for each group, but we modified them based on like the person's role in that group. All of the interview protocols took a strength-based approach to strengths and to focus on strengths and talents. All of these interviews were conducted one-to-one, with the exception of one person who worked at an accessibility services office, or one group. There was one pair of two from one of those offices. Everyone else was done that. When we interviewed high school teachers and counselors, there were two interviewers. There was the person who was answering, who was asking all the questions, and then there was the person who was taking notes on it. As Joe said, we probably got through 40 to 50% of the interviews we were conducting. Like, I remember the last time I talked to it, like a student in an office, was like March 19th. And literally, I think after that interview, we got an email saying, you should go home for 2 weeks and then we're going to come back. So students always had the option to go online or by phone. But many more of them took that opportunity, obviously, with that. And so we were able to interview 40 students, which is a really large number, particularly for college students with autism. For the remaining participants, those, because we were doing it in the middle of the COVID pandemic, those were all done by phone or video conferencing. We did overrepresent, four-year institutions in the Northeast that were incredibly competitive. And high school teachers and counselors were also from the Northeast. These interviews ranged in length. Some autistic individuals give very short, direct answers. So, the shortest ones were 13 minutes, but they lasted up to 60 minutes. If you want to go to the next slide, Joe. For this, we recorded and transcribed all of them. We had we had different participants. We had 3 students, 1 parent, 1 post-secondary ed professional, all do member checks of the themes and the coding we did. We used a direct content analysis. We identified codes beforehand and then during, and we allowed new themes to emerge. And we always had 2 reviewers and coders so that we were able to do integrated reliability. And we used similar protocol and analysis for all of the studies, which let us sort of be able to put the results, so we had parallel protocols. We're asking the same questions, and then we're analyzing that data in the same way. So then we can crosswalk and be able to talk across what all of these participants said. It really gives us richness for our data. Joe, if you want to go to the next slide. So we recruited from disability accessibility services offices at 4 institutions in the Northeast. Each student was currently enrolled or had just completed, right? So we didn't want you to be too far away from completion. We were sort of like, if you graduated in the past year, you can be there. You had to have a previous diagnosis of autism and be receiving post-secondary supports, right? So someone looked at your documentation and said, you have autism, you're receiving accommodations and other services at the college level. We also, they all provided, evidence of taking honors, advanced, accelerated courses, being part of a gifted program, or taking college classes while they were in high school. And they were at really competitive universities and colleges. They all gave informed consent, and they were given a $20 gift card. So if you want to go to the next slide. Unlike many studies, so, many studies of autistic individuals, have these really, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 ratios. We had a little bit less of a ratio in terms of the male to female ratio, and about 10% of our sample identified as non-binary or transgender. So, it was more diverse than other samples, and pretty across the board, all the different levels of experience were represented. We had, graduate students. We had a few students who kind of were taking different pathways. So they were kind of I'm almost a junior. I'm in my 3rd year of college, but I don't quite have the credits to be a junior. And that's what that between 2 years line represents. But you see fairly kind of across the board, all of the ages were represented. these 40 college students with autism, it was very exciting to be able to interview them. About 75% of them went to a public high school, 25% went to an independent or specialized school. All of them had GPAs above 3.0, and about 60% had high school GPAs above 3.5. We could hear that, Joe. So
good. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yep, no worries. We just knew if we did it now, it's just better to get it done now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their average SAT scores were 1320. Their average ACT for those who took it was 26. What was super interesting, right, is that we obviously, you had to complete advanced courses, so it's not surprising that over 73% had to take advanced courses. For the ones who didn't take advanced courses, they were recognized as gifted earlier. They had been gifted ed programs. Some of them just went to such small high schools that those high schools couldn't offer advanced programming. But if their high schools had offered it, they would have been students who would have taken it. 53% had, especially in elementary school, had participated in gifted ed programs. Based on some research I had done on college students with autism, this was a finding that wasn't surprising to me, that for this group that's highly successful in college, over half of them had been away to summer camps and enrichment camps before they went to college. When I've done studies on students who were less successful in college, this percentage wasn't as high. But most importantly, and Joe's going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's on this slide, so I just want to kind of set the stage for it, is over 90% of them had participated in clubs and sports, both in high school and college, right? So students who we think of as not being social and not gaining those social opportunities had went and found. Some of these students founded clubs. Some of these students were holding leadership roles in clubs. Some of them went through 4 or 5 different, whether they tried cross country, and then they tried tennis, and then they tried robotics, and then they did theater, or whatever their order was. They were resilient. They went through a bunch of different things, and they learned so many social skills that they were able to apply to the college setting. And someone asked a really interesting question: what residential programs did they attend? So some of those were just more traditional camps, and some of them did go to things like Center for Talented Youth and other things, or they went to robotics or coding camps. So some of them were more traditional summer camps, and some of them were the CTYs, or were advanced coding camps. Camps, if some kids were into tennis, they went and did tennis camps, that type of thing. So some of it was what we traditionally think of as gifted ed. Some of it was more traditional, sports, or just sort of general camp experiences.
And I think one student went to a program on meteorology at a university.
Right. That was the other. Right.
Yeah. So some of the key findings that came out of this study, in addition to what Nick just talked about, was that a majority of them indicated that they had been academically gifted, identified as academically talented, and received these services while they were in school. And about 3/4 of them had taken AP or honors courses, or courses that they could earn college credits at the same time while they were in high school. And they talked about the importance of that in terms of challenging them and interesting them, the rigor of the courses, but the challenge, and they're able to really do deep dives into areas of interest for themselves. Nick just talked about this part, that 90% of the sample participated in at least one extracurricular activity. And oftentimes, as Nick said, there were multiple clubs before they found what their right fit was. And when we interviewed the parents, the parents also talked about the importance of these activities and these clubs, and that many of these students were actually in leadership roles. And it really was a significant boost to their self-esteem and self-image that they were in areas of interest, but taking these leadership roles. The students who had the overnight experience also talked about how that helped prepare them for freshman year or first year of college when they moved away from home. And it gave them kind of a taste of what it would be like to be more independent away from home. A very large number of the students, when we talked about what were the things that were important for you in being successful in college, they talked about things related to self-awareness, understanding their disability, understanding their skills and their talents, self-advocacy, knowing when and where and how to reach out and receive supports, both in high school and at college. And they also talked about the different types of time management and organizational skills that they developed and really customized. So each student had a different set of, or different way to approach this, but many of them talked about the importance, particularly when they got to college, and now all of a sudden their day was less structured and they had to manage so much work coming at them so quickly. I remember one student talking about figuring out that, this project is going to take me 20 hours. So I need to then break this down into X amount of hours per day in the lead up to when that's due. And so he had that really down to kind of an exact science that worked for him. One of the things that Nick just talked about in relation to some of the clubs and other activities was really clear was that the students talked about, they all faced challenges and difficulties, whether it was academically, whether it was dealing with faculty, whether it was in their academics, but they didn't give up. They all talked about finding a way to compensate, finding a new direction, a new approach. It didn't always happen right away. It took some reflection. Sometimes it came a little bit later in their college career, and they, with some experience. They also talked, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but they talked about the importance of working with mentors or support staff or tutors who could help them kind of troubleshoot and find ways to work around the difficulties that they were having. Another interesting finding was that 43% of the students went to a smaller school first before they transferred to the bigger schools where we met up with them. And sometimes these were community colleges, sometimes these were regional colleges or branch campuses to the main campus that they ended up at. But they did that because these were smaller settings, closer to home. And some of the students talked about the importance early on of being close to home in case they needed to get home or in case something needed to happen. On the other hand, I should say there were some students who were very clear that they wanted to get away from home right away, and they wanted to be living on their own and sometimes in big cities. So, it was a little bit different, but for each student, but interesting that 43% did go through the transfer process. So I think that's an important piece to bear in mind when students are looking for schools is that, the idea that a transfer opportunity may arise is something to consider. And as I mentioned, nearly all of the students talked about the importance of mentors, contact person, and key influential teachers in their lives. And here are some quotes that capture this. One student said, "I had an amazing teacher who gave me opportunities to participate in projects. One of my mentors was a science teacher, and she also gave me advanced opportunities. She let me apply science to the real world, and to me, that was beautiful. She gave me the confidence to know that I could go beyond and do extra work." Another student said, "There were so many people that believed in me and gave me advanced courses and advanced independent projects. They gave me time to write short stories. They let me explore my strengths and interests. They nurtured me. They gave me a fluid opportunity. Many public schools are like conveyor belts, but my school was like the elevator in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory." So again, the importance of somebody recognizing their talents and their gifts and their abilities and their strengths and letting those really rise and flourish was critically important to the students. Whoops. And as Nick talked about clubs and activities, one of the students said, when we asked about this, what were you involved in? Robotics team. I love that, as I struggled a lot socially growing up, but in robotics, I liked having a team. It made me feel good about myself. I was part of the Women's Science Club. I founded a Girls Who Code Club. I was a math tutor. I'm a STEM nerd. In this regard, students founding clubs, there were several that did that. One of the students that you'll see in the video coming up talked about that when he went to the regional campus of his university, either restarted or started 2 or 3 different clubs, and then was in the leadership role in 2 or 3 other clubs. Another student said tennis, documentary film, senator for senior year, mock trial, band and choir. Every year we make a film for competition. There's a topic, and we make one about education declining as there are funding problems in my town. I did that for 2 years. And here's some clips of the video modules that we created, and we'll talk more about these in a little while.
Understanding myself as an
Can you hear
autistic
that
person
okay?
definitely did occur in elementary school. I knew from a very early age. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 14. So all of my high school years were sort of marred by my experiences with my mood disorder, which made things very, very difficult. And in high school, I would say that I experienced a little bit more of the loneliness feelings because I felt so different from my peers. Some advice that I would give to, an incoming autistic student into high school: being yourself, being authentic, figuring out yourself, like taking the time to grow as a person, right? Because eventually you're gonna go to high school, and if you wanna go to college, like you kind of have to have a better, developed self-concept. So getting to know yourself and your interests. In terms of, autistic students who are high performing, academically, the best advice that I can give for transitioning into college: time management, not taking the culture too seriously, not trying to fit neurotypical molds in terms of socialization, because that will burn you out. It is important to access, disability services in college. You don't really know what they can offer you until you go there. I wouldn't have known that I could have my own academic coach for a full year if I hadn't just reached out and been like, what accommodations can I have? It was a game changer. It was something that I had never really experienced before, and I felt empowered to take it into my own hands. During college, the most beneficial disability services that I received were definitely an academic coach. I owe college to her. Having someone sit down with me and really say, like, look, I know you're struggling. What can we do to make that lighter? For me, college was the place where I figured out that it's okay to not go to things if you're burnt out, if you're tired, if you just don't feel like it that day. There's a metered approach to this that should really be tailored to the person. And I look forward to autistic people realizing that, and being able to sort of break free from the shackles of like what is supposed to happen in a social relationship. There's no such thing. Everybody develops differently. And that goes for socialization as well. In thinking about what enabled my success going into college, so I think, sort of the resilience that was built up in me through professionals was very helpful. There were several teachers. I had one teacher, Miss Faye, who I hold very dear to my heart, who always made sure that I knew I was supported. Even if things didn't go well, she didn't put emphasis on, you need to go to college and do great. She was like, who are you? What do you want to do? What are your passions? I'm here to support you in that, and that allowed me to feel like I sort of had not only a safety net in the case of things going wrong, but also made me feel like, wow, like maybe I can do this. Like if another person is seeing this in me, like, okay, I feel really bad about myself normally, but having that external recognition was really important.
A lot of school districts just aren't prepared for people with disabilities because we're such a minority, and that's in some school districts, and especially because this was like the 2000s, and people really hadn't understood, I don't think, fully autism. They would just shove anyone with a disability into a classroom and just separate them from everyone, and they would have like strict rules, and they would have different policies for dealing with misbehavior and everything like that. A lot of the problems I had were definitely due to the environment, because being put in a setting with people who are emotionally disturbed and low-functioning autism, and then being a high-functioning autistic person that has a hard time understanding social cues, learning from people who have that kind of that's why I personally don't believe I'm personally emotionally disturbed, but I believe being around people.
In thinking about what enabled
One more clip.
sticking with what you are interested in, I think of course, there's something to be said about branching out, and discovering other interests. But if you're really impassioned about something, especially for autistic kids, like that's what we do, like we're gonna go in full force. We're gonna be like completely committed to the cause. And I think that that's really something that fueled, my transition to college. I was like, I know what I want to do. I know what I'm excited about. So why wouldn't I go full force into that? Even if it was difficult, even if I had barriers and had to set myself up.
So those are just some clips of the online video modules, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes and give you more information about how you can access those and a more complete picture of them. We just wanted to talk a little bit too about the interviews that we did with the service providers at 11 different service providers at 10 different schools. And they talked about some very similar things that the students did. One was the importance of what they tend to use the word touch points. And these were on-campus contacts or on-campus mentors or advocates, somebody that the student could connect with and work with. And in the video, you heard the student talking about the importance of their tutor. They talked about, I'm going to skip down a bullet here, but they talked about that contact being as early as possible. And that could be through summer orientation programs as well, both generalized that are available to all students, but also some schools that were offering specialized orientation services or programs for autistic students. Another big thing that came up was the concept of navigation and navigating the range of campus services. This is something the students talked about as well. Knowing where to go, knowing who to go to, knowing when to go there, how to get there, those types of things. But also navigating social interactions and environments. So how do you handle residence halls? How do you handle dining halls? How do you handle lab work with partners and group projects? Being able to navigate those different demands in different environments was really important. The service providers also talked about the importance of being involved in clubs so that there were some social contacts and connectivity in areas of interest, people who were pursuing the same types of things to create some friendships and provide that social base. Being students having the skills to be able to communicate with faculty members, part of the advocacy thing, but also, and this ties into the next bullet, being able to differentiate social interactions in different settings. So how do you interact socially with a professor? How do you interact with friends? How do you interact with somebody that you might have a romantic interest in? Depends upon the situation, and you have to be able to adjust the way that those are approached. And as the students talked about, the service providers also talked about the importance of self-determination and self-advocacy skills. But they also talked about, and I'll skip down one bullet here, the pieces here related to organization, executive functioning, study strategies. But they also talked about the importance of how do you motivate students when they have to take courses that are outside their area of interest. When they're in areas that they're focused on, they can drill down, as the student said in the video, they can drill down and go all in. But what do you do when you're in a course that you have to take for your major or for a general education requirement that's maybe not as interesting to you? So that was a key piece that came up. Another piece that the service providers talked about having to reflect on for themselves, but also for their families, for students in transition to reflect on, is listening to the student and listening to what the student wants and their values, and not projecting our own values or expectations onto the students. One service provider talked about that she wanted the student to be, she didn't want that student to be in a dining hall eating alone. And then she learned from the student that was a period where the student could just kind of recharge, and the student actually wanted to be alone, and the service provider had to learn that was okay. If that's what the student wants, if that's what works for the students, she had to let that go. Other big pieces are that families and K-12 schools understand the key differences between the laws that support students in IDEA and special education, or even Section 504 plans at the high school level, versus what they'll be experiencing under Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act in college. So understanding those key differences and understanding and promoting student independence as early as possible, and independence in terms of things like daily living skills, getting themselves up early or on time, laundry, medication management, diet, all these types of things that students will need to be able to do when they get to the college level. Nick?
Awesome. So we're going to kind of go back, kind of Google Earth, like into the big picture. And Joe just talked about some of this, so I'm not going to belabor some of it. But when you look across all the studies, right, the studies that when we talk to the students themselves, when we talk to the providers, we talk to the parents, the teachers, the counselors, and it's important to note that the students varied. Some of them were in autistic specific programs at their colleges, and some were receiving more traditional accessibility services. But regardless, what everyone talked about is like having this person that they can go to, whether that's built into an autistic specific program or just knowing this is my, disability or accessibility services office person that I can go to. It can help with like troubleshooting situations. It can be mentoring. These students talked about receiving peer mentoring and then being a peer mentor and how valuable that was. So really having like college, as Joe said, it's hard, right? Like everything has been done for me to this point, right? The school does everything. The school provides everything. Even if I only have a 504 plan in high school, the school has to provide it for me. I don't actually have to do anything. But at the college level, I all of a sudden have to do everything. I was in a meeting with a student with a mentor recently, and their mom was very concerned that they weren't receiving accommodations and that they, maybe they didn't have extra time on tests. And, the mentor took them through and showed them, no, you have that. You have to now tell your professor that you do, and you have to get that accommodation. Like it's not, the professor isn't going to give it to you unless you ask for it, was the moral of that little mentoring session that I saw. In terms of making this transition, it's like really like understanding like what the challenges the students have, what the strengths the students have, but then also understanding like when they go off to college, there are going to be accessibility services, but then there are also general supports that are there, especially these are becoming more and more ubiquitous in terms of writing and math centers and other tutoring that's provided and other support with study and learning and time management strategies for all students that are in college. So you may not just go to get services in one place, in other words, and students have to realize that they don't have their special ed teacher anymore. That's the person that like helps them to get all of their services. And there's also just differences in between teachers and professors in terms of what they expect in terms of communication and other things. And that all of that has to do with like the importance of social skills and knowing how to manage different interactions and using extracurricular activities and clubs related to an interest to do that. And I think that's so important. Joe, if you want to go on to the next slide. We've talked a lot about self-management skills, but like we kind of get, being able to have a schedule, breaking down longer and larger tasks, sometimes things that are still done by high school teachers for them, even among 12th graders sometimes, and I don't like to see that, but it still sometimes happens. That planning ahead that Joe talked about. And then helping, I think, students with motivation. So like, where can they work for extended periods of time? Where can they fit their interests in? So they're at least taking at least one class they're interested in every semester. So it's not just, I get you through your gen eds and then you get to do the interesting stuff like that. And that grit and perseverance of like, you just sometimes have to do the stuff that it's outside of your interest, but you might end up liking it. Many of our participants talked about mental health. They talked about the challenges of mental health in terms of feeling isolated or lonely. And as Joe alluded to, and this is like an analogy that we've used amongst ourselves, and I use this a lot with my autistic clients, my clients that have social anxiety. A lot of our participants talked about they need this time to recharge their social battery, right? So I think it's important to not like say like, but you're not being social in college, or you're not. And I deal with parents all the time that are like, my kid isn't social, my kid is alone all the time. And sometimes it's like they just need to recharge their social battery. They've like worn themselves out socially, and they need that time to decompress. Many students had strategies. They were exercising, meditating, finding quiet time. They were doing telehealth pre-COVID, even with providers, or they found providers on campus for that. They were keeping their medications managed, so that they were taking like really proactive steps to manage their own mental health. The next piece, Joe, if you want to go to the next slide, what we kind of heard everyone say is like, really focus on what supports were received in high school and how those are going to be different, having them understand not only like their disability and not just like a label, but like, what are you good at? What do you need? What are your strengths? What do you bring? And getting that practice with disclosing and requesting accommodations. I'm not sure if you all do this at UConn. When I teach classes and Joe teaches classes, we get the like form letter in our email that like so-and-so has these accommodations. Some universities do that. Some universities, it's still the student's responsibility. I've been taught in other places and they all walk up and have to hand me their letter and we have to work out their accommodations. Even if I get the form letter, students still need to know that, like, how do I request those accommodations? I think in high school, providing opportunities to practice advanced social skills, practice independent living skills, thinking about managing money, all of those pieces. Joe, as you want to go to the next slide. Someone asked a question about this. We didn't directly find out the socioeconomic background of students. I'm gonna like go. I think your point is very well taken. Of like, many of these students were had means and had economic resources, and thus could go away to sleepaway camps and could go to competitive and very competitive institutions. We did have some students that had more financial distress in their lives, but they were not the majority of students. I do want to say that when we did the intervention study, we really worked to recruit students who were culturally and linguistically and socioeconomically diverse. But
Nick, I just add too that we did have a couple of students who were first generation college within their family, and we had at least one student who was very clear that she was at times homeless or was a ward of the state when she was younger.
Right. So we had a pocket of them, not necessarily the whole the whole thing. So that's the thing that does that. Obviously, like, they were at very competitive or mostly competitive. It was a small sample size. They may have told us kind of what we wanted to hear. We did try to address that by having like member checks of everything, multiple coders and checks, and like we really try to be aware of our positionality. Finally, Joe, if you want to go to the next slide. We've put out, available free of charge, and you've seen kind of clips from it, a professional learning video module series. It's something that parents can look at. It's something that high school teachers and counselors can look at. And it just sort of gives the like, here's like who these students are, what we need to know about them, what high school experiences are helpful to them as they go to college, how to support academic success, and then a whole module about how to navigate college life that kind of goes into what Joe and I have alluded to about really making those differences in the laws and the way services are provided really clear to students and families as they make this transition. And then we have a very nice summary module as well.
Nick, do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want to pull it up, just
pop up the website real quick, see if it will open. So this is the project website, and this is available. All of this is available for free. The video learning modules are over here. Looks like we're having some web issues. Of course we are at this time, but you can access the video learning modules here. And then the other thing I'll point you to is the publications and resources. So each of the studies that we've talked about has been submitted to journals and published. And as much as we could, we put these in open access journals. So you have the DOIs here to access these articles, and almost all of them, or the majority of these, are available for free. So I apologize for the glitch we've got here, but
Dr. Gilbert and Dr. Madaus, so there is one comment. If you would be please able to share the link of this free of charge videos to the chat box so that people can also access it directly? Thank you.
Sure.
Sure, I will do that in a second.
Yeah, well, I have to get out of the full presentation to do it, but we'll get it in a second.
Okay, no problem. And so in the meantime, so as you can see, the Zoom is again telling us that this meeting will end in less than 10 minutes.
Okay.
So we still have so a couple of minutes left, and apologies for that. I'm not sure exactly why this is going on, but yeah, let's continue. And please, we will have also time for some questions after the presentation. Thank you.
And that was sort of what we had. We wanted to thank we had many colleagues and grad students who participated in this with us. In the chat, someone had asked about did we ask about pull-out services? And we did ask about it. We didn't ask them, like, we didn't go into a super amount of depth about it, because we were more interested in, like, what's your life like as a college student, and what did you think helped got you there? But we did ask them specifically, like, did you participate in, like, pull-out gifted programs? And that's where about 50% of them had said either in elementary or middle school they had participated in those programs. And I don't know if there are other questions. I tried to address, as people wrote them, I tried to address them.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you addressed them also throughout the session, throughout the presentation already, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. So there is a link to the videos now in the chat box for everyone to access it.
That's actually a link to the project website, so you can get the video modules, you can get the articles, you can get other resources as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So you can also, everyone, you can unmute yourself now to ask anything or comment on anything, and you can also use the chat box. So I will give opportunity now to everyone. Please unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments you want to ask our speakers directly.
I just wanted to, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to comment on what you were talking about in terms of having a support person on campus, whether that is somebody to touch base with. For me in undergrad, I had somebody that I would meet with to go over accommodations and things like that. And they were really wonderful to plan that ahead of time with me and touch base with me. I noticed a shift when I went to UH Manoa. I wanted to talk about it here because I think this is hosted through UH Manoa. And I think since we like changed Zooms, I can't see the bios of everybody. People were posting them at the beginning, but I think some people were in the linked up with disability studies. I had a really different experience at UH Manoa, and it was like not great. It was not good, honestly, where I got the basic accommodations, but no support beyond that. Very, very basic accommodations, very different from any university that I'd been to before. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to underscore like what you were talking about and really say that really does make the biggest difference in the world, just having kind of somebody check in with you and make sure everything is going okay, and seeing what support you need and seeing if you need any help kind of implementing some of those organizational strategies, and taking the time to do that with you. So I really appreciated everything that you all included in your research. And I can absolutely validate that in my own experience as being a neurodivergent person, that those strategies are incredibly helpful. And I really appreciated everything that you included. And then there were a couple of other things. I'll try not to be too verbose. But Oh, I was wondering if you would be able to send out these slides so that we can go back and reference them. I know that you said that you're going to send out a recording, but I was wondering if you could also send out just a like a run through of the slides so we have those notes if we want to go back and reference them.
Claudia, did I send you a copy of the slides? It would have not had the video clips because the memory is too much to email. But did I send you? If not, I can send it to you right after this.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, so both the recording and the slides will be available on the PIER website, and you will all get a notification when the recording is available. I will just in case copy and paste again the link to the PIER website so you have it there. It's right there. And please don't forget to complete the post survey. I believe we still have a few more minutes. So any final questions? I see one question here in the chat box. Did any of the students in the study have community wraparound services like DVR?
Like, so did they have Voc Rehab, Joe? That was something that
I think just that one student, Nick, who
right.
who was homeless. I think
Right.
she had some, but I can't remember if it was VR services or Department of Social. It might have been Social Services, not VR.
Right.
I can't remember.
Right, and that also kind of speaks to a regional thing of like that. That's less. That funding is less braided in the Northeast. It's much more separated than it is in some other states, from what I know. So, and I know Rod was raising his hand.
Yeah, I was just curious if on the East Coast, especially in elementary schools, if there was a shift to funding things other than gifted and talented education as technology expenses increased in the early 2000s, because I think here in Hawaii, a lot of the impetus for gifted education really faded away by 2010 or so. Just curious how it was on the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would say it's. We also run, on the East Coast, especially in the Northeast, it's all very atomized. So it's very like at the town level. We don't really do county school systems, and so that means like I would say that it's faded. So while in Connecticut we do great research in terms of gifted and talented, and technically our state law says you were supposed to identify students as gifted and talented. Services I think have declined over time. Also due to policy shifts, and it's hard to that's where you start getting like multiple values going at one time of being like, I don't think that it's not RTI's fault, but like RTI, you had to provide interventions at some point and somewhere, and you needed the time to do that, and then so that resources went to that.